Hello everyone, welcome to Inspected Goals, the pod that aims to improve our FPL play through a more analytical approach. I'm joined as usual by my co-host Sam. Sam, how is it going, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. I probably enjoy the international break a little more than most. I was quite a big fan of international football, despite England not playing particularly well over the last three games. But I'm all good. Yeah, how about you, mate?
Yeah, I'm thoroughly checked out, to be honest. I just take it a back seat. I don't watch any international football anymore. I learned that a long time
Really, yeah.
ago. That I don't enjoy it, so I don't watch it. I literally watch them at tournaments. I'm a proper casual international fan these days.
Too much heartbreak, or you don't enjoy because it's not the standard isn't as high as the Premier League or the Champions League, for example.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, really. I don't know. I think when you watch the teams in the Premier League, we're kind of spoiled. I mean, the level of tactical analysis, I was going to say, but it's not the right word. The way the team's set up, the approach, how they're drilled in their passing patterns, everything has obviously clearly been worked on for a very long time. They have very clear identities, and I just don't think it's really fair for international teams. They just get thrown together. They get a couple of weeks, and it's just a mismatch of people. And I know maybe people will say, this manager's been in charge for 4 years or whatever. I still don't think it's any good when it's bit part, just sort of coming in and out. And I just think obviously a lot of the time we're playing against far worse opposition, and then occasionally we'll play against opposition that's kind of like it, and I don't know, it just doesn't really do it for me. I don't know why. Obviously the tournaments I absolutely love, but it's also just to get a bit of a break, I suppose, because busy life, so it's hard to keep up with it all.
So I get it. I think that's one of the things people don't appreciate about international football is that just lack of coaching time in general, and maybe that potentially being one of the reasons why we play conservatively, and why so often teams that aren't particularly easy on the eye win tournaments, unless you have an era like you have with Spain, 2008 to 2012. There are other examples of teams who are like, they're good, and maybe they play messy football, but they manage to win. I don't know, like Portugal winning the Euros, for example. Even like in the World Cup, Italy nearly lost that semi-final to Spain as well. They were smashed in that semi-final in the Euros. It's just very, with it being knockout football, can be very random in terms of results as well.
Absolutely.
So it's just so different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even in terms of the Champions League, you have a bit more. Well, there's less chance of that having an impact because you have the two legs as well, with it just being one-off games. Yeah, but that part of the excitement of it. But I understand what you mean by that though as well.
Yeah, the last time, I mean, I used to, when I was younger and I had more time, I'd watch it a lot more. But generally, Spain, that's the last team I really enjoyed watching. Obviously, that era where they won like 2 or 3 tournaments in a row was just, I loved watching it. I know that wasn't for everyone, right? I saw loads of people going, it's so boring watching this ticky-tacky football, but I love that stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's easier for them because the majority play for the same team at Barca.
This is true.
It was almost Barcelona without Messi, and with Ramos, for example, and Casillas. And Germany teams as well in the past, you've had basically the majority playing for Bayern Munich, for example. So I think that's why, another thing that people maybe don't appreciate as much with England is just have the complexity of that in having to. It's not as simple as just putting the best 11 players on the pitch in terms of the best performing at club level. So I still enjoy watching it, and similarly to you, also love the tournaments as well. Looking forward to it.
Definitely. England is becoming more and more Man City, though, aren't they? Seem to be buying all the English. They could potentially put out nearly an 11 from City, I suppose, mixed in with Liverpool. Even with Phillips, when Phillips is back. Then it's
interesting. Interesting to see if Phillips goes, won't it? Because when he gets back from injury, well, prior to his injury, he obviously would have been. He was in the starting 11, wasn't he, in the last Euros? But it's not just the fact he's coming back from injury, but also even prior to his injury, the lack of game time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Definitely will. Right, should we move on from England's woes? Did they end up winning that game? I don't even know what happened. Was it 3-3?
They drew 3-3,
okay.
Then goalkeeper error and then a tap-in.
Yeah, people slagging my man Pope. I like Pope, but I didn't watch the game. Yeah, I think he's a good goalkeeper, but apparently he was terrible, so... Anyway, what were we going to say? We were going to talk through our teams briefly. It's been a long while ago, as usual, because we just seem to get breaks all the time in FPL at the moment. I wildcarded last week. And in terms of that individual week, I did pretty good. What did I actually get? 74 points, which I think was...
That's very good.
Yeah, the average was 50. The team was actually quite generic, but I went for the De Bruyne and Isak route. I think most people maybe went Kane, and I can't remember who they had in midfield. Maybe Bowen instead.
Yeah.
So it was fairly equal, considering most of those guys probably put the captain's armband on Kane. So mine was on Haaland. So overall, it wasn't too much difference there. My main thing was picking Patterson, which I did just simply as a filler, really. I liked him as the filler option further down the line, and we're playing 12. I didn't really expect him to get a clean sheet this week, but he managed to get it. But then obviously subsequently has got injured along with Isak. So straight after my wild card, where I had planned transfers all the way to 16, obviously never anticipated I would actually be able to go through with all of those, but they were in my mind. But they're straight out the window already because I've got 2 injuries. And probably have to do something about that. So yeah, decent week. Team's looking pretty template. Part of what we're going to look at this week is looking at what the game week 9 wildcard would look like, because I think that's quite popular in the community at the moment. And having looked at the review team and my team, it's not too dissimilar. So pretty happy with going early. How did you get on?
Yep. Well, you must have had a big green arrow for that.
Yeah, I never look at live and how much of a big arrow, but I'm sat at 40k at the moment, so I'm doing all right.
No, that's brilliant. I'm nowhere near you. I'm still just outside the top million, but had a really good game week finally. Not nearly as good as yours, but it was good because I didn't wildcard and I managed to save it. It was a funny one because I was in quite. I chatted about it on the last podcast, so I won't go into too much detail. But essentially, I could play 11 players with a -4, which I did to captain Kane. So that paid off, which was great. I ended on 64 -4, so 60 points, which got me a hefty green arrow when I didn't expect one at all because of so many people wildcarding. So I went from about 1.8 million to about 1.2, and it's only in fact, it's only a bit over the average, isn't it? So it shows how close it still is. But yeah, more importantly, it's set my team up really well now. It's not dissimilar to a lot of wildcard teams, and I'll hold that wildcard until game week 13 is my plan at the moment, unless anything goes disastrously. In classic FPL fashion, one of the funny things that happened was I basically could have played 11 without a hit, but the reason I took the hit is because if I hadn't taken the hit, I'd have had to start Reed,
Oh my
who
God.
then got 10 pointers. So he was sat first on my bench, but I took a -4 to not play him. But thankfully, that -4 meant bringing in Kane and captaining him. So I think overall it worked out at a similar score, and I managed to get my team in a better place moving forward. So overall, that worked out okay. And I think, yeah, quite an unusual position because on the podcast today, obviously, we'll chat through a bit more around game week 9 wildcard, even though neither of us are on it. And I think my position is probably fairly unique, but I've chatted to a few other people who are also looking at game week 13. And the advantage there is the City and Arsenal blank, particularly in 12. And City also playing Liverpool before that. And Arsenal's fixtures not being great around now. So it makes it easier to sell the Arsenal players, sell City players even in that last game week. Maybe not even worry about bringing Salah in immediately, where some people need to try and find a transfer to do that. I can hold off and then in 13 bring back in. It'll probably be triple Liverpool, triple City and triple Arsenal at that point. We'll look at the fixtures in a moment. And yeah, from 13 onwards, those 3 just look absolutely brilliant. So I think at that point, I'll have a big advantage. Only for 4 game weeks, which is quite unusual for a wild card. But it's just a bit of an odd season, isn't it, with the
Definitely.
with that forced wild card in 16. So yeah, I'm far more pleased with where my team is now, having been able to hold that. And I think I'm going to be rolling the transfer probably this game week, and then see where I'm at. See whether I'm brave enough to take out Arsenal players because they play Liverpool, but then they've got Leeds. So it's a tricky one, knowing whether I then remove Saka straight away, for example, to bring him back in 13.
Yeah.
Or it's an interesting one.
It's strange because I don't think we should really care about one individual game that much, if you're selling and buying players back, because it's a lot to invest in one game and a transfer, isn't it? Especially when you consider value lost and stuff. But when you're playing, I think I mentioned it last week, and James Owens was the one who highlights me, although we try to play this in an analytical way, it's more of a cash game that we're playing at the moment than a tournament to sort of reference poker with these short little 8-week stints or sometimes 4-week stints or whatever, because of the way we've got a chip halfway through. Means that it lends itself to that kind of style, I think, where we are focusing our transfers, as long as we don't get injuries and stuff, on how can we make it optimal for every individual week. So to the point where we're removing an Arsenal player for just because they're playing Liverpool one week, whereas before I wouldn't even think about doing it. If it was like a stretch of 5 games and they had one bad fixture, you just ride that one out, wouldn't you? I mean, there's obviously a decent chance Arsenal could score in that game, the way Liverpool have been defending recently, and the fact that Arsenal just seem to be a very good team. So very interesting. I'm going to bring up the team ratings here from FPL Chase. If you guys aren't following him already, make sure you do so, because he's putting out a load of good stuff. So we've got the expected goals conceded or clean sheet predictions basically across the next 8 weeks, so game week 9 to game week 16. This takes into account their fixture strength and the strength of the team, so it is scaled. So you've got Man City, despite having a blank in game week 12, still right at the top at 3.29 expected clean sheets over that period.
That's mad, isn't it?
It is mad, but their defensive stats are just obviously insane. This is why I think, just right off the bat, and it's been all season, Cancelo or a Man City defender in general, it's just a very good idea to have in your team despite the blank. Whether you sell for that blank, whether you're the player to cover in 12, I don't really think it matters too much. I just think that having one is probably a pretty damn good idea. Likewise with Liverpool, they are still right up there. The data hasn't dropped that much. We looked at it last week. They've obviously got Matip back, and their fixtures are a little kinder now as well. So although Trent might be just out of reach at the moment for some, but those on wildcard I think are very much looking at him either this week or...
I've still got him, mate.
And you've still got him, exactly. So I'm jealous. I'm jealous, to be honest. I'd love to have him. I don't. I do have a plan to get him, but I still think he is still a pretty damn good idea, to be honest. Yeah, and just aside from that, we've got Palace in third, I think, which... we talked about that last week as well. They've not been as good as they probably should have been. They have had extremely tough fixtures, but now they go on a very kind run, and they've got some fairly favourably priced players. So maybe they can offer those filler spots. I think I've got Patterson, who's now injured. I think Nico Williams, people are realising Forest aren't particularly good defensively. For just a little bit more, you can start to fill those spots with the likes of Palace defenders. I don't know if you think that's maybe a good idea or not, but the data here seems to suggest so.
Yeah, and they've got Guay, I think you pronounce it. He's gone down in price again, hasn't he, to 4.7 now, I think. Which if you can get a Palace defender at that price, that's ridiculous. An interesting one is for wildcarders. I wonder if any of them are considering Guaita as well. Could be an interesting option also. And then in terms of the bottom half of that table, I don't think there's anything of note really, because I don't think many people will have owned defenders from those. Even if you've got those bottom 10 teams, apart from the Leicester keepers, maybe some people have Patterson now, but that's fine because he's cheap. That's the reason. And obviously Williams, you're not buying him to start every week, or if you are, maybe now's the time not to. It's only really like the Brighton players. I guess quite a few might still have Dunk, for example, and it's time to just maybe move on from them, or maybe not consider Sanchez up until 16 if wildcarding.
Yeah, cool. Someone in the chat saying Gay's 4.3. Yeah.
Yeah. I knew he'd come down by that amount. Well, I was thinking he'd started at 5 and moved down, but he's gone down to 4.3. That just seems like an absolute no-brainer to me if you're wildcarding.
It does seem like a nice filler option. I haven't seen him in many teams, to be fair. I do like that. Some of the teams that have been a little bit iffier on the form near the top there, so Spurs, West Ham, Chelsea. Obviously, there's a bit of an unknown around them, and Newcastle still 7th. A lot of people have Newcastle defenders hanging around from last week, and just they've still got a couple of decent games left, I think, of their run, and it's a bit up and down, to be fair, but they're useful in a few of them.
I think even those people who like tripled, because I know some people tripled up on Newcastle defence, say something like just teams I've seen on Twitter or people I've chatted to, but I think most people who did that didn't do that planning to play all 3 every week, did they? It's normally just playing 1 or 2 of them, so it's not too much of a concern, and generally they're near the top, and it means in those weeks where because it's so up and down, and for example, who do they play in game week 12 with that 0.5, I wonder?
I'll have a look.
Anyway, in weeks like that, that's where you can maybe play 2 or 3 of them. So
home to Everton that week, yeah.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Absolutely.
And another thing just to add on Palace as well is obviously a lot of this is to do with fixtures, but we know how good they were defensively last season, which we've mentioned on almost every podcast, I think, as well so far. So I think there's good reason to. I think many who wouldn't even usually use a kind of data-driven approach and would just look at goals conceded last season and look at their fixtures are going to go for Palace defenders. I think it makes sense whichever way you look at it to try and get one in there.
I think when there's one at 4.3 million, it's worth spinning it rather than one of the cheap ones. Like, so you don't even have to play them every week. I think that's fine. Let's move on to goals predicted. So expected goals on average per team. Again, it's scaled in the same way. So right at the top, unsurprisingly, in some cases, despite their fixtures, we have the best attacking teams in the league. They seem to generate the most expected goals, and there's no real reason to jump off these guys, really. I think the game week 12 blank, as mentioned, for the defence obviously forces a couple of issues. But outside that, it's much of the same, I think, really. There's a few other teams mixed in, which I think for the mid-price mids, which we're going to discuss about in a bit, with some of the teams in the mid-bracket there, like Leicester, obviously with Maddison, etc. But yeah, the rest of the big boys are still right up the top, and Man City again right on top despite missing a game, which is it's just mind-blowing, really. That they can still be...
Even Arsenal in fourth with missing a game as well.
Yeah, it shows the disparity, really. I think in the quality of the teams at the top compared to the rest of the league at the moment.
Fulham are surprising there, aren't they? Seventh, like the highest team outside the top six.
Yeah, the fixtures are just so good for them, aren't they? That's why everyone has got Mitrovic either last week, this week, or is looking to get him, just because the sustained run is so good for them. And they're not stand out on any of those weeks particularly, are they? They don't even reach 2 on any of them, but it's just consistently good games. I think Mitrovic is an absolute no-brainer to have up front there.
So something I would say in terms of bearing in mind and looking at this, it doesn't mean automatically you discount teams at the bottom, because a lot of them are, for example, if you look at West Ham there, their good fixtures are all weighted like towards the next 4 or 5 game weeks. And they've got a lot of good ones coming up immediately, so you've got to think about when you're going to play your transfers in general. But there will be some players that you do hold now until 16. So it's those kind of players that, as always, we go for those top teams as well. Yeah,
and it always comes down to individuals, right? This is the teams expected, and obviously different teams have a variety of different scorers. And in the case of West Ham, if there's going to be a goal, you would hope one of Bowen or Antonio, if he's on the pitch, are probably the most likely candidates. So there's still options, of course.
You'd hope if you own them anyway.
Yeah, if you own them, of course. If you don't, then don't care about it.
Something like Antonio last season. Well, it was such a ridiculous season, wasn't it, from an FPL point of view, because of his start compared to the rest of the season. But I think all season I've not seen a single team with him in. Like, he's just not even worth considering.
Just too expensive, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Interesting stuff. And I guess we can use this now to kind of think about what we do if we're on game week 9 wildcard, which is, it's interesting thinking about it when you're not on it, because obviously we've not been thinking about it specifically for our own team. So that might be beneficial in some ways, because we're coming to it fresh and coming from a more general point of view and not thinking about the own biases of our own team value, for example, losing value on players.
Yeah. Then in the same breath, though, obviously when you start to put the team together yourself, if you're not there manually clicking it and seeing how it all puts together, you start to miss the little nuances of who you have to miss to afford another person and stuff like that. But like I say, we looked at the review team, and I don't think it's too dissimilar to mine. I flicked over to at LegoMane _FPL on Twitter's fixture ticker here. Now this fixture ticker is a bit different. It doesn't do it on the team strength. It's doing on the recovery period. So it's got game week 9 to 16. The teams are listed in the order. Sam spotted this of where they finished last season, we think, with the promoted teams at the bottom there. So there's no relevance there outside that. But what's interesting to see is obviously the recovery there of 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. No real surprises. The teams that are in Europe have got a grueling schedule. Man City are sat with 6 games where they've only got 2 days in between. They've also got 1, 2, 3 with 3 days in between. That's pretty brutal. Now, is it enough to put us off these teams? Obviously not. I don't think it is. But I think it's probably worth bearing in mind that, I think we've been blessed this season anyway, where generally you want to be having a sort of playing 15 in your FPL team. And I know we've got the extra subs and this whole how much does it count for the subs coming on, but given there's a blank thrown in there as well, I really think it is important to have 15 playing players. They don't have to be the best players in the world, but certainly players that play. And I think there's just a lot of options that thankfully are very cheap and do play, right? So it's just to bear that in mind. Like we said, about having a Gay maybe is quite useful across this period, because I think there will be some surprises. Liverpool as well, Chelsea with Potter now. They've got a lot of bread up there as well. We know Conte rotates; they're high up there. Arsenal haven't really been doing it so far, but they do have options. They do have players on the bench like Smith Rowe, and they do have Tommy Asso and White at right back. They have got a few options around the team now, which they didn't have before. So I don't think they will rotate as much, but I suppose there's always the possibility, right?
It's also bearing in mind though. Although I agree with that, like this is the time when we're going to see rotation, with it being so congested. It's actually pretty similar, isn't it, to the it's probably not for a team like Man City. It's probably not that different to what it's like at Christmas in a normal season, and then they've still got that to come. But yes, in general that means more rotation. But the difference is this year is the 5 subs, and I barely used my first sub at all this season. Maybe I've used them once. So I think I agree in general, like we need to be more conscious of our whole squad this over the next few weeks, but I don't think you even need to have 15 that play. I think 14 is probably okay. But you're right, there could be some, like, I think particularly with like Liverpool as well, with Jota coming back and Nunes now there as well, and Firmino as an option. I think it makes those 3 players particularly rotation prone at this time as well.
Yeah.
But like I said as well, just because it's not just that rotation, is it? It's also just the likelihood of injury. So again, having those 15 players is probably helpful, or a stronger bench, and maybe particularly a stronger first sub is helpful for if you randomly pick up a player picks up a knock, you don't want to transfer them out, but you just need to play someone else for a week. So I guess for that reason as well, not just rotations, but also just the reality of players being more likely to pick up an injury.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Chelsea, for example. I think, given Potter rotates anyway, but then you look at their schedule: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Yeah, 7 games in red with 2 days in between. The Champions League status isn't 100% either, is it? They need to be focusing on that. The rest of them are pretty much all yellow, unless I'm looking. There's like...
Yeah. Well, 4 of those 7 are Premier League games as well.
Right. So look at the Brentford Man United section there, and then I think there's
5 of them, yeah.
Yeah, so think about a player like Reece James. I mean, he's in my team and he's not going anywhere, but could he conceivably miss one of these games? It's Potter. It's a right wing-back spot. He's a player that has picked up a lot of injuries in the past. He has got a history of doing this. So if I was the medical team, not that I know what I'm doing, I'd probably be throwing out, you might want to rest James for one of these games. I don't think it's enough where you just don't pick him, because I think he's amongst the best picks in the game and the 100% be in there, but it's... it could come very annoyingly in that sort of game week 12 or 13, which is where you're kind of hoping to use your squad.
That's a good point. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, with City and Arsenal blanking in 12, with maybe like rotation being a likelihood for Liverpool with a fixture in red and Chelsea with a fixture in red, and West Ham when some people own Bowen and maybe some people have, like, I don't know, Dallo from Man United. Like, yeah, you're right. Actually, that could be an absolute carnage that week.
It could be. There's a lot of teams in that game week 12 that are actually red, even some of the lesser teams. I'm not suggesting they're definitely going to rotate, but it comes back to the sports science. They may not have a choice. The physios might say this guy is in the red zone, he has the break. But there's just been another break in football. We're sort of coming back to... We say there's been a break. I suppose a lot of them have been away on international duty, even in the lesser teams that happens now. It's just interesting. I think it's going to be chaos. Maybe not now, but I think this pretty much continues all season after the World Cup as well. We also have to factor in the World Cup, how draining that's going to be on players. I think rotation is going to start to sting a lot as we move forward. But let's hope it's not as bad as I'm doomsmongering.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought. Obviously, I knew that there was that game week 11 was midweek, but I hadn't thought of the implications of that, with it also being a blank and also the likelihood of rotation, how mad that week could be.
We really need teams like Man City to... I mean, they play Copenhagen right at the top there, then Southampton, then Copenhagen. They're not qualified in the Champions League yet. Now, to me, given the comments we had on Haaland before, and Man City players in general, he said when there's games every 3 days, he won't play. We took that to mean the first time it happened, and it didn't happen. But I still think the point stands that he means when there are games every 3 days, there will be a period where he won't play him. That's the way we should have translated that, I think. So will he not play one of those games? For me, he probably won't play one of those games. However, given Man City's Champions League status, like I said, if they win Copenhagen, I think Dortmund are away to Seville as well. And if they were to lose that one, then they're suddenly both on 4 points and Man City are on 9. So they're as good as qualified as top of the group. So it would probably come in the Copenhagen game. But it may not be, right? If they lose that first Copenhagen game and Dortmund win, suddenly they're very, very close and Dortmund can then win the group. I don't think Man City would want to take any chances, so it could change things. So, interesting.
Yeah, completely.
Anyway, should we move on then? We've decided we were going to look at some mid-price mids, haven't we? The ones that either bought this week or prior week, or on wildcard this week, or just looking in general until the end, I think they're a useful position. Simply the structure of our teams seems to be that we'll have at least one of these, possibly two in our team, maybe even three in some cases. So we've picked out a few names. I don't know if you wanted to talk us through some of these, Sam.
Yep. So I guess it's first to say that we've taken into account the underlying data from last season, as well as this season in general, just because of how misleading it can be with only a few games being played so far this season. One thing that we've done there is XG rather than non-penalty XG. The only player something just fell off my desk. The only player that impacts this season is Zaha, in terms of having taken a penalty. But you'll need to take that into account in terms of looking at penalty takers last season. The thing I would just say, just broadly initially, it's interesting how so many of them, on almost every single one of those stats, maybe apart from Zaha, where that would be 0.35 if it was non-penalty, XG per 90 this season has just dropped off slightly. I think there could just be randomness, I guess. It could be that because a few of these boys don't, apart from Foden, Saka, and Mount, a lot of them don't play for the teams who've had really, really good fixtures at the beginning of the season. So maybe that's the reason for some of them as well. I just think that's interesting. And then the thing we've got in that last column as well is is just the predicted points according to FPL Review's massive data model as well, and that's from game week 9 through to game week 16. Just for those who are listening, we'll try and mention the numbers as we go. Does anything initially just stand out to you, Luke?
I think Zaha being the cheapest one there, 7.2 million. The most useful column is the predicted points, and he sat at 31.9 from 9 to 16. Fixtures are good. That's the second highest, I believe, of all the players mentioned here. So we've got Diaz, Kulusevski, Bowen, Foden, Maddison, Saka, Mount, and Zaha that we've chosen. He's sat at 31.9, so he's the very top is Bowen at 32.8 predicted on the model, and then you've got Maddison and Saka very close also on 31, and Diaz at 31. So given he's a lot cheaper than the others, and obviously it allows you, or it should do, to use that money elsewhere to get better players or better expected points in your team, I think he's just the standout one to get. It's tricky because we haven't actually seen Palace play for a while, and they come straight in with I think it's home to Chelsea this week, isn't it? Which isn't an ideal game, I would say. I know Zaha has made a habit of scoring in games like this when they're playing against tough opposition. It's obviously on the counter. It does kind of suit his play. So I don't think you can completely rule out that he would do anything. But it's still not the ideal fixture to target, I would say. But outside of that one game, their run is ridiculous. And therefore, I think he's just he's the obvious pick. He's got the most points predicted and he's the cheapest. So, I don't have him in my team. And my plan was to get him after this week. It still can go ahead with my planned transfers, even though I mentioned right at the start that I have to kind of scrap getting Salah in this week potentially because of the Isak injury. I can still now look at Zaha next week because I think Salah's got Arsenal, hasn't he, the week after, so essentially I just have to postpone Salah for 3 weeks rather than get him now. I think Zaha's probably going to be my move, and I think most wildcarders will probably either have him, start him, or maybe even just bench him this week, but I probably would start him anyway. Have you got him or looking to get him?
I'm looking to buy him next week as well, I think. I'll take out Saka for him. I don't think I'd necessarily generally recommend that move, but that's partly because I can wildcard in 13. So I'll be taking Saka out when he plays Liverpool. I won't have Saka for the Leeds game, and then Saka blanks. So I think that's what my move will be. Yeah, for me, that's what stands out. He's the cheapest player here. His underlying data was good last season. It's good so far this season. It's inflated there because of the penalty, or the two penalties, one or two he's taken, up to 0.54, but it's 0.35 per 90 anyway this season.
It's decent,
So still similar numbers to last season, and his fixtures are about to get better. So I just think he's a great pick.
Absolutely.
And he'd be my pick of the bunch. The other player that stands out for the opposite reason is Kulusevski. I guess when I put this list together, we kind of thought about what players are people considering, and also it was just a big discussion point at the beginning of the season. These like 8 million midfielders, and Kulusevski was in that discussion. So I just think now, because of what we've just seen as well with the congested fixtures, the fact he's got to compete with Son and Richarlison, I don't think Kulusevski's a good pick now at all until the World Cup, and maybe he will be later in the season if there's an injury, but I don't think either of us have been that big on him at all. so far this season.
No,
to be honest,
he surprised me because he's so good to watch. He's a lot better than I gave him credit for. But and the fact he was benched 3 times in a row, I think it was at one point. Although I think they played much better when he actually played again. It's just Richarlison, isn't it? He's cost a lot of money. He's obviously Conte wants to use him in that front three, and I don't think you can guarantee which one of the two sides he'll actually use him or who it will affect in terms of minutes. So. Yeah, the fixtures aren't particularly fantastic either for Spurs, are they? And his predicted points are the least of everyone. I don't think anyone's really looking at him though. I think Maddison is a bit of a no-brainer this week. I mean, the fixture's just ridiculous, and again, he's got a quite extended fixture run that is good. I think maybe the last 2 or 3 games before 16 aren't the best. I think you could lose him potentially. It's a bit of a mixed bag at the end, but. I had him last week and started him. I didn't expect much against Spurs. Thankfully, he came through with the goods. But the idea was to have him there in preparation for obviously the game this week and then the sustained period after that. I think again he's just pretty much a no-brainer. I don't think I've seen anyone who's wildcarding who's not picking Maddison. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you see a lot on Twitter. Part of why we do the show is we like to try and cut through any narratives that we see, and the strength of a team or how well they're playing or seems to affect people's decisions so much in some areas. No one wants Solanke, no one wanted Pukki last season. There's numerous players who think, well, they're just bad. They play for a bad team. Like Bowen for West Ham's one, where it hasn't gone so well. But when it comes to Maddison, because obviously he's been getting points, people are happy to pick him. But Leicester are dreadful. They have been dreadful for quite a while. I suppose the other argument for that is the fact that they just always seem to score, right? That's what they'll throw back to me. But I just find it interesting that the narrative seems to be picked and chose depending on basically if they have scored points or they haven't scored points. That's the way I look at it.
Completely. I mean, just on Maddison, I think he's been a brilliant player over the last year or so, and I'm a big fan of him in general. But in terms of Leicester, what you're saying there, it works the other way. People will look at Leicester and think, Leicester are really bad because we know they are this season. But maybe not separate the attack from the defence. And the Leicester attack's not incredible, but it's a lot better than their defence. So we probably relate Maddison to Leicester, think about the fact they're bad. That might actually put some people off and have the opposite effect. So we've got to try and discount the fact he scored recently, which was a great finish, by the way. And also focus on the attacking stats, and particularly his individual stats rather than the team as a whole. But no, you're completely right. Like last week, so I captained Kane, as I've already mentioned, and as we discussed on the last podcast, and he was a great captain choice. Haaland was also a great captain choice. At half time in the Man City game, when Haaland had scored in the first half, I saw people tweeting, is Haaland just a permanent captain now? Perma-captain. Why don't we just captain Haaland every week? And then suddenly he doesn't do anything in the second half. Kane happens to get a goal and an assist. And now people will captain Maddison instead of Haaland. I just personally, I don't get that at all. And people are very, very, very swayed by what happened most recently in general. So just to touch on that as more of a general point as well, I think even with the Haaland, who's currently the best player in the game in terms of just total points, what he's doing at Man City, even 1 second half probably changed people's opinion on him massively, or at least changed their decisions from permanent captain to say, shall I go with a differential captain this week because he's playing Manchester United, who were good about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Heung-min Son was a perfect example this week. I sat on this show last week and said if you told me Son would start, he would have 100% been in my team. I had De Bruyne because we basically got the leak from Paul O'Keefe to say that he probably wasn't going to play, and he didn't play. Now, I don't claim that to be some magical talent of mine. It was Son's an extremely good player, and he was home to Leicester. He was a great pick as far as I'm concerned. But the interesting thing now is he's come off the bench and scored a hat-trick. People are willing to give him the chance. But it's like we said on that pod, it's just anytime, anywhere, these players, they can switch it on at any point. And that's always the worry, right? If you start to follow the pattern of, Liverpool are a good example, they've not been playing well, they can just change around at any given point. As long as the data's still looking reasonably good, I think putting more weight in the historical data is more useful. And that's
or if there's a clear reason for that change in data.
Yeah,
and you don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
No, and I said right at the very beginning of the season, actually, I didn't think Son was an FPL option this season, particularly because of his price compared to the other guys and the fact that his minutes were threatened by Richarlison. That's why I writ him off. But for an individual week, obviously, and as a player of talent, I'd never question that for a second. And if you're on a free hit team, and we had the information that someone was going to start, then he would absolutely be in, I think, most people's team, regardless of what you see on Twitter about, he's rubbish, he's not playing well. I can't for a second believe that they actually think this player is finished as an option and he won't turn it around. We're seeing the same sort of stuff with Salah at the moment, right? There's nothing that tells me that Salah is finished as an option. I can't foresee anything apart from Salah, being as good as he's been in the coming games. Maybe there is a massive tactical shift, and because we still haven't fully seen Liverpool fully at it when they've got Thiago, Matip, maybe Nunes is starting up front or whatever. If we've got sustained data to say that there's something different, fine, but at the moment I think it's very, very marginal, the difference in his performance. His underlying numbers, I think he's about 5 under what he should be or something in XGI. So I don't have a doubt that that'll turn around. And I think, I don't know if you watched the game, but Jota playing up front for Liverpool seemed to make a real big difference to them. We have to remind ourselves that Nunes, who was talk of the town at the beginning of the season because he scored a few goals off the bench and everyone was going to rip up their teams to get him in, is nowhere near anyone's team anymore. And Jota comes straight back and he seemed to make a big difference to their team. Klopp even said Jota had the qualities of Firmino and Nunes or something along those lines. I don't know if you saw that, but basically he was using the best parts of both of those players and putting it into one player. That's pretty high praise. So I think Jota at the moment is probably going to be the guy who starts most games up front. I think you'll see Nunes come on for the last 20 minutes. I think that's probably the way it'll work. Obviously the fixture congestion may change that, but I think that's his plan at the moment. It seems to make them a lot different. And if that's the case, suddenly Jota becomes an option again, right? If he's going to start starting, because Jota's always had incredible numbers whenever he's on the pitch. So it's one to think about.
Pricey though, isn't he?
Is he now a forward as well? I can't remember.
He's 9 as well, I think, isn't he, this season?
That's ridiculous. So Price will probably write that off for a start. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But it's how quickly the narrative changes. That's what I was trying to get across there. We're 7 games in, and already we've had many, many narratives around a lot of these teams that have quickly either been disproven or changed, and then straight away they start up again with new stuff based on the last week. It's hard not to do it. We've all got eyes, we all watch it, and we're all fed it by the commentators. But that's what we're trying to aim to do, is to cut through that, right? We won't always get it right, absolutely not. But it's hard work, isn't it? I suppose, because when you're on Twitter, you feel like everyone feels that, but really, it's probably about 2 or 3 people that you follow, and suddenly it's like, oh, everyone's thinking this, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's us getting overexcited as well.
Well, a perfect example of the Twitter bubble is a lot of people considering Solanke this week, and I checked his ownership and it's less than 1%.
Is it really?
Yeah, still less than 1%, and that will change, I guess, and we'll come on to chat about him.
It definitely will. Let's switch over.
Even though it hadn't, even though a lot of people haven't bought him yet or are planning on buying him, that's still lower than I expected. And in terms of the other players on here, we've touched on Diaz already, Kulusevski we've touched on, as well as Foden with potential rotation. Maddison we've touched on, Saka already. The other, Bowen, I think, is the other one that's interesting that people will probably might have a problem with, just because of the fact he's quite highly owned by analytical people who are into FPL analytics. But he's been really poor this season, a lot of people think. But having watched the game on the weekend, the last game week, I think it's the first West Ham game I've watched this season, he could easily have had a return or two. I'm more interested in his stats last season and the fact that they've got a good next few fixtures. Yeah,
he's got 32.8 on here, which is the highest of all the players. This is without penalties apart from Zaha, but he does have penalties, so we could just get lucky.
Probably,
you could just get lucky and he can get 3 penalties in the next 8 weeks or whatever it is to subside that. I still think he looks the most dangerous. His stats have dipped a little bit, but it's a small sample. It's 7 weeks or 6 weeks in some cases for some of these teams. I don't doubt that West Ham just not going to score goals again. They're pretty much the exact same team. If anything, they've improved their squad, I would say, overall. And people can sort of point at Europe, but I think they rotate quite heavily in that, and they have had that in recent years anyway. So I don't think it's a massive issue. I think it's just a matter of time for Bowen, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've covered all the main points there on that slide. Luke, do you reckon?
Yeah.
We think Zaha's great, Maddison's great. There's some concerns about rotations for other players, and don't buy Kulusevski.
Yeah. I think on the Foden one, actually, just briefly, after the blank, I think Man City have got a really, really nice run. And I think it's been shown so far that Foden, when he's available, he will generally play for Man City. He'll either be on that left wing spot, or in the cases where Grealish is brought in, he will play on the right wing spot. And Man City's attack is generating the most XG overall and the most predicted goals. So if you want a cheaper way in than De Bruyne to sort of double up on their attack, I don't think Foden's a bad option at all for him after 12. I think in my plan at the moment, I'm looking to get him in, I think, for maybe it's 15, I think it is, Saka to Foden I've got planned or something like that, for those last 2 weeks at least. But I just think he's a good option overall. People are obviously have been afraid in the past to touch on him, but he just constantly ticks along, and I think he can perform at a higher rate. I think that he's only going to get better, and I keep saying that it's not necessarily happening, but you can see that his XGI is quite balanced, but then also at the same time it's weighted higher on the XG than a lot of the other players listed there. So I think,
yeah, good point.
I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing some decent production from him as well, and people will think, why haven't I got an 8 million midfielder in the Man City attack who pretty much plays up front with?
Yeah, that's when the tricky choice between double Man City defence or him could become a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think in the defence at the moment, it's so all over the place outside Cancelo with the injuries and the amount of rotation, the amount of options they've got there, that it's suddenly flipped back the other way now, where I think Foden is better. At the beginning of the season up to this point, I would have definitely said double defence is the better way to go. I think now, with the amount of players they've got in defence since they've signed Akanji, it probably flips the other way. And we've obviously got the evidence of Foden continuing to play. Anyway, let's move to review team, which is the team that we've put together using FPL Review, which is a wildcard side from now, and it's factored in. It's on 8, isn't it, on the solver depth? So within 8 fixtures with heavy, which is basically spending the most amount of time to look the deepest into it. We've not touched the expected minutes. Free transfer value, Sam, is it 1.5 still, or?
Yeah, whatever the standard is.
Okay.
It's 1.5.
Yeah, it is 1.5. Yeah. So this is the team that wildcard that Review says is the most optimal team to pick if you are on wildcard for up until 16. Obviously there'll be transfers factored in here if you run the solver, or you can do that yourself. But it really likes this team. Now the thing that jumps out to me straight away, like I said right at the start, I think from my team it's like, let me just have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like 4 or 5 players different than my team from last week, which, it's only 1 week, so you'd probably expect it to be fairly close. And I did try to follow quite closely to the expected points model.
The starting 11 or the whole squad?
The whole squad.
Really,
yeah. So I think Zuma and Dunk I haven't got. I've been cheeky because Solanke is coming in for me this week probably, so that, and I'll have the same front line. Zaha's coming in the next week, but I've got otherwise the entire midfield, the whole 5 is mine. The back line, I've got Trippier instead of Shah, and I don't have Trent. And that's pretty much, and the goalkeeper's different, so that's it. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 players after I make my sub. And I think I'd prefer Trippier than Shah personally. I'd love to have Trent Alexander-Arnold. I don't, but I do have a plan to get him. I've got Pope instead of Alisson, so it's not too dissimilar. It's very, very close. So if that's comforting, but at the same time, this team is a little bit ahead of mine because I've got planned transfers to get these guys, and they already have them, right? So then everything changes as we move forward as well. So is your team looking anything like that, or do you think that's a good team, or any changes you would actually make to it?
Yeah, it's not. I think it's 6 or maybe 7 players off my team at the moment. I think 5 or 6 if you I've got, for example, like you, Trippier instead of Shah. I've got Cucurella instead of James, although they're not quite as comparable. One thing that surprises me is that Alisson's in there straight away, and I think something to take into account there is probably the fact that this is a team from now until 16, isn't it, completely? Whereas I think I would be more inclined, if I was on wildcard this week, to go with a cheaper goalkeeper and plan to bring in Robertson to triple up on Liverpool from 13 or from 12 even, and to just target Liverpool defence from then, just because it still looks a bit shaky now. The midfielders are just coming back in, and their fixtures aren't great now. And then by the time you get to 12, it's easier to then bring in Robinson than it is to switch your keeper at that point. There's more value in bringing him in my opinion, just in general in avoiding keeper transfers. Nothing surprises me at all about the midfield at all. Same for the defence. I don't find it particularly surprising, to be honest.
No.
But I think Solanke is like a talking point, definitely.
He is, isn't he? I think usually when we run these, because we don't, there's this common misconception, everyone just runs the FPL team and picks it. They don't. Usually I'll do this and there'll be some question marks for me. I'll look at it in questions. So for me, Shah's a bit of a question mark. But outside that, I literally wouldn't question any of the picks, which is quite rare, I think. Like you say, Alisson maybe, but I see why. It loves premium keepers. It has done pretty much the whole time, outside Everson and Ward double up, which it also loves. And he's 5.4 million, and he obviously plays in 12. So that's a no. If you are going to go for premium, he ends up being the no-brainer goalkeeper. Obviously,
and Guehi, who we've already mentioned as well. I'd probably try and find a way to get him in there.
Yeah, I think Zuma or Dunk, you could use him instead of one of those. I don't think that would be a terrible idea. The Solanke one, yeah, that's another interesting one on Twitter at the moment. I don't think anyone's expecting massive points from Solanke. It's what he enables elsewhere is the main thing, isn't it? I mean, that's the bottom line. He's got great fixtures, really, really good, especially immediately. The team XG has been terrible, but I keep saying it. It's only been 6-7 games. I can't remember any they've played. I think Solanke himself missed the first 2, and then he's come back from injury as well, which usually we give some sort of grace period to players who come straight back from injury. So individually his data has been poor, the team's data has been very poor. I get that, but the sample size is tiny. And you look at Solanke last season, and yes, it's in the Championship, but his XGI per 90 is fantastic. It's better than Tony's was in his season, where he was ridiculous and is now taking the league by storm. It's a very good rate of XGI that he was using, and this is under Scott Parker, which he now no longer manages Bournemouth. Now, I appreciate that they still haven't got a manager as far as I know, so they could get anyone in, but can we foresee a world where they get a manager who's more defensive than Parker? I think that would be quite a tough ask. You would have thought, it would be a fair assumption anyway, that the manager that come in would have at least a little bit more of an offensive mindset than Parker. So we don't really know. There are some unknowns, but I think given the price, given the fixtures, given his historical data, there is literally no argument you can make against Solanke for me. You can't use 4.5 games under Scott Parker and say he's a bad option, to me.
Yeah, I think the fact he's on penalties is obviously a big one for him as well, because even though as a team they don't create many chances, there's just always that hope that you might get a penalty or two between now and 16. I think the argument against him, I guess, just from glancing at this, would be, couldn't you do Solanke down to a 4.5 or 4.4, then upgrade, for example, in this team, Dunk or Zuma to another premium defender? But I guess the reason why that's off the cards for a lot of people is because City have a blank game week coming up.
Yeah.
So people aren't going to go for a City defender. There's uncertainty around Liverpool's defence. And Potter's just coming to Chelsea as well, so we don't really know where Cucurella stands, for example, and doubling up with him and James. Perisic, again, they've got such a busy congestion. He's probably the only what we classify premium defender in the Spurs defence, who we probably wouldn't count either. So I guess that would be the norm, and what happened at the beginning of the season as well, that people went for a 4.5 and avoided a cheaper striker to go for a premium defender, but that option's not really there now, I guess.
No.
And even if you downgrade Solanke to a 4.5, it's not like you can afford Robertson either because he's so much more expensive.
Yeah. The one would probably be Gabriel, right? But then Arsenal's fixtures
they blank as well.
and they blank, exactly. So I think he would be the other one to look at. But
and the alternative is that you go Solanke to a 4.5, and then you upgrade Andreas to a better midfielder, but there's not really one. Do you really want to go for Anthony Gordon rather than Solanke? I don't think so.
No, neither do I.
So I think it's probably, I do think that there would normally be an argument against it, but it's maybe quite a unique position with the fixture congestion impacting those premium defenders that are normally the normal alternatives to the third striker.
It's either that or find the money for Tony, where I Tony's expected points over Solanke are higher, so I expect Tony will score more points than Solanke, because who am I to argue? However, it's the value thing. You pump in quite a lot more money. How much is Tony? 7 something? Is it 7.2 or something like that? It's quite expensive. So then suddenly you probably have to lose Trent on that team, which some people might be prepared to do based on how they've been performing so far. But I personally wouldn't. He's 7.2. You could bring Trent down, and you could take Solanke up to Tony. Again, I wouldn't argue. I think that's okay. I think that's fine. But I personally would prefer Solanke and Trent Alexander-Arnold. And it's not we've seen this so many seasons now. At that price, Pookie was around this price. Norwich were dreadful as well, and I know they were. People will probably say, well, it was a more attacking side, but yeah, we don't know what manager Bournemouth are going to get. And he ended up being value just on the basis that he plays every week and he's got penalties, and I think it will be similar to him. And I'll just go back to the fixtures. It's for 8 weeks. It's what enables you elsewhere. No one's expecting him to haul every week, but if he does, then great. So yeah, I think we've banged on enough about it. It's just the sheer hate anyone gets who hasn't scored points recently, or based off a small sample, right? It's not just that they haven't scored points, then they'll go, well, their data's terrible. But it's 4.5 weeks for Solanke, or 6 weeks under a different manager. Can't take that on board, I don't think. Granted, Bournemouth could just be really, really bad and not be able to make the step up. They'll get a new manager and he's also trash and they're rubbish. That could easily happen. Like that, no one would say that's not a possibility. It's just still that, regardless of all that, he's good value for the fixtures. Because
and it's what you mentioned before about not putting together a game week 9 wild card yourself. Like for me, when I just heard it on face value, I'd have been thinking to myself, well, why are people going for Solanke when the options there are Mitrovic or Tony instead? Or you can have, when there are other better striking options. But yeah, it's when you start to put together a team, isn't it? And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who are heavily criticising it aren't on wildcard this week, so haven't had to think about what that offers you as an alternative. They can think of it just directly. Oh, you only need a little bit more money for Tony, so surely you can find it somewhere. But if you look at this team, I can understand why a lot of people on wildcard would go from completely. And I also, if you go back to our very first video, or maybe our second one, where we showed like our initial drafts, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the season, I think you had Solanke in your team, I think, Luke.
I did, yeah.
You didn't end up with him in game week 1, but he was there because Review loved him.
Absolutely. He was benched for Review nearly every week, so in the end I thought I'm not going to do it. But yeah, Review did love him, and it does continue because it does put a lot of weight on the historical data, so fair enough if you don't. But I've already mentioned it, I think you pretty much, in this team at least, and I think this will be very, very close to most people's wildcard team, whether they're even on Review or not. I think that would surprise some people, whether they even use it. It would probably be very close to most people's wildcard team. It's losing Liverpool somewhere, which some people may be prepared to do on the basis of Salah down to either a De Bruyne or a Son, Trent down to someone else, Alisson again down. Maybe you can change Solanke into Tony, but is that worth sacrificing a Liverpool player? One of the best, these are some of the best players we've had in the past, like God knows how many years now, 5, 6, 7 years. Top tier picks. I'm not just going to throw them out the window after 6 weeks personally. So there we go.
Probably... One more thing is, one way you can do it is go Alisson down to Iverson
and do the Leicester double up.
That does actually allow Tony over Solanke. In this team it does anyway. Okay. If you feel that passionate about Tony over Solanke, maybe you go with a really, really bad keeper who's basically guaranteed 1 point every game week. So I don't think it's advisable, but I wouldn't be surprised if a few go down that route.
I think, do you know what? That gets a lot of bad press for good reason, the Everson Ward double up. But again, their fixtures are so good, and at that price, surely he's going to eventually end up being some decent value because of what it allows elsewhere. If Tony outscores Solanke by, 9 points or something, or even more, then it's quite hard to actually find goalkeepers that are going to score more than that in most cases. However, an Everson and Ward have somehow managed to do that so far. I don't think they continue to be as bad as they have been, right? Surely that's not possible.
Yeah, maybe. Because they have been absolutely horrendous, haven't they?
They have.
The interesting thing is that Ward's particularly been poor. So actually, if you look at their goals conceded compared to the chances they've given up, XG conceded, they're conceding even more than you'd expect because of Ward. Now, he might just be going through a bad patch, and that might change as well. Or they might switch him for Iverson, and he'll improve them in terms of post-shot XG, or however you want to describe that. So it's one of those things, isn't it? Because they're both 4, as soon as they get one clean sheet, people will be thinking, why don't I own them? And if they happen to get... I can't remember who they played last week. And can't
Spurs.
remember if Spurs, yeah. If they happen to get a clean sheet there, which I know was very unlikely, but say it just happened, how many more people would have them both on wildcard night? So many, because they think, they've just got a clean sheet against Spurs, look at the fixtures. So you never know, maybe some people out there will just go for it, and maybe they'll turn out to be absolute heroes. We'll see.
I would, if I was on wildcard, I would consider the Ward and Everson double up, definitely. I would consider it. I don't know whether I'd do it, but I would definitely consider it because it's so cheap and the fixtures are still there.
I've got too much PTSD from doing it from day one.
Fair enough. It's one of those ones where, because you're not tainted by it, you can sort of do it, right? It's like the Digne thing. People buying Lucas Digne. He's all right. He's never affected me. So I can't do it to myself. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
Mohaned's in the chat saying, can you guys discuss Barnes versus Maddison? Have you got any thoughts on Barnes versus Maddison?
I think... what do I think on Barnes versus Maddison? It's an interesting one. I don't know off the top of my head how many minutes Barnes is playing.
He's playing.
He's playing regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not changing it around too often.
Yeah, I think I would be... My instinct, having not thought about it a lot, is just to go for Maddison over him because of how much more of a proven asset Maddison is, and also I don't like this idea of covering teams and going for Maddison down to Barnes just to cover Leicester, for example. I think that makes a little bit of sense when it comes to the defenders because they share clean sheet points. But I think if it's for that reason to downgrade Maddison to Barnes to allow yourself an improvement elsewhere in the team, I don't think that's worth it. I think Maddison's a real must-own on wildcard because of those fixtures. I think if you go for him, you probably go for both. And he's like, you've got him in over Martinelli, for example. Barnes. Yeah,
it must be a price thing. He's just put there in the chat again because I think if they're the same price, you just have Maddison. But I'm a
6.9 Barnes. It's not actually that different, is it?
No, I suppose not. But 7.9 is Maddison.
So, yeah. Okay, 1 million different. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Barnes though. Generally, I think he's a very good player. I think that he's got a lot of potential. Injuries is the main thing I would point to, where he just seems to pick them up all the time. And I know Maddison's sometimes does that as well, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Barnes picked up an injury in this 8 weeks or just dropped out. Because if Rodgers is still there, we have seen it happen before. I think with Barnes, he can have up and down games, and Rodgers is more willing to sacrifice Barnes than he is Maddison. I don't think that's in question. So that would be the worry. But given we are only going for a short time here, 8 weeks, I don't think you can totally destroy your season by going Barnes over Maddison. And there is a world that exists where Barnes could outscore Maddison. So if it simply comes down to price and you've got your team you're completely happy with elsewhere, it's a bit of a differential against the field. I don't think it's terrible. I do think he will play the most of the games, but I think Maddison in a straight fight wins quite comfortably.
I just think I don't hate it by any means, and I think he's only 0.6 more expensive than Martinelli, Martinelli's got Spurs, Liverpool, Leeds, and a blank. So maybe you put him in that slot and then you'll then need a plan to get Martinelli back in my opinion, because he's such good value. Maybe that's where you consider it. So I don't hate it by any means. I think he's probably, if you were to compare the midfielders at that price, I think he probably is going to be one of the players right near the top at the moment because of his set fixtures. It's just whether, if I was wildcarding now, whether I would be considering him over Maddison. I don't think so, and I don't think he would generally fit into a structure because, again, the likely thing is you're banking a transfer, in my opinion, because I think it's likely he comes in instead of Martinelli.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Hopefully that helps you, Mohamed. Should we move on?
Yep.
Okay, we've only got one slide left, so we're doing pretty good. How long we've been going? We're going 58 minutes, so not bad. I've just brought up the Man City team my predicted Man City team for this week. Again, it's open to change. We haven't seen the press conferences yet at all. It's been an international week, so I'm sure that will affect the players in terms of how much they've had to travel, which Pep is obviously big on and he has cited before, their injury status when they come back. So I will update this. So based on the information we have right now, I think this is likely to be the team that will play Man United. Kyle Walker was on the bench for England. I think he even came on, didn't he? I didn't watch the game. I think that's right.
Which game?
Versus Germany, did he come on?
The Germany one. No, I don't think he came on, actually.
Oh, didn't he? I thought he did. But
maybe he did, but he definitely didn't start, no.
Okay. I think he was on the bench. I'm pretty sure I saw him. So that would suggest to me that he's probably back. Given the fact that Stones got injured in the England game, and Stones had been filling in at right back, it looks obvious to me that Walker will probably come in if he's fit. So he'll be at right back. Cancelo, therefore, will be at left back. There is obviously Ake is the one who's missing here who could play, so he could come in and therefore Cancelo could be right back, or he could come in for one of Diaz and Akanji. But considering how well Diaz and Akanji have been playing, Akanji misses this game coming up for Switzerland, I think, because he's banned for it. He actually scored and assisted in the international week as well. But it's more about his progressive passing. With Laporte out and with Stones out, they really lack that in the back line. Ake's not quite as good as it. Diaz isn't quite as good as it. So I really think Akanji will play that simply because of his progressive passing. And then Diaz, when he's fit, he generally plays. So I think that's highly likely to be the back line on the information we've got at the moment. I can't see a world where De Bruyne, Rodri don't play. I can't see a world where Foden doesn't play or Haaland. So really it's Grealish and Bernardo Silva. I think Bernardo Silva is now... He didn't start the first few games of the season, but ever since then he's pretty much found a place for him regardless. He is playing... I think Bernardo Silva's playing tonight for Portugal. I think he's starting. And Gundogan came off for Germany, having played. So I think there's a slight element of risk there because Gundogan is potentially more rested. However, I think Bernardo Silva serves this game better because we all know that Man United will try to counter on Man City. I don't think that's up for debate. I think that's the way they'll try to beat them. They'll try to suck up the pressure and then they'll try to counter with the likes of Rashford, right, and score the goals. Pep always says in these scenarios that he likes players that take the time on the ball and they try to stop that counters by obviously not giving the ball away. So that lends itself to me to having Bernardo Silva in centre midfield and also Grealish on the wing. Because Grealish, obviously, that is his main talent, is to pretty much hold on to the ball and make sure the ball doesn't turn over and keep possession of it. So I think Grealish will play left and Foden will play right and Bernardo Silva. So that's my rationale for picking that team. But we'll see.
On Walker, mate, I just checked it. I'd forgotten he came on in the first half because Stones got injured.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he came on the 37th minute, so played about an hour.
Okay, cool. So that looks pretty settled to me then that he'll play. I mean, like I say, this is ahead of the press conferences, so things may change. But to me, that looks a fairly, famous last words, fairly predictable Man City team this week. However, I did get 10 out of 11 last week and 11 out of 11 the week before. So we're on a bit of a roll, and I hope I can keep up with it. I think Bernardo Silva's probably the dodgiest, but I think you play Bernardo Silva in a game like this. It's just too good.
Yeah. Haaland's playing tonight, isn't he?
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so yeah.
He's playing against Serbia tonight. I've just checked.
Okay. Hopefully he doesn't get injured.
Yeah, so it's it's him and Mitrovic up against each other.
Oh yes, of course.
Whoever wins goes up or something. I don't know. However the Nations League works.
Yeah, no one knows. You even follow it, don't you? I ain't got a clue what's going on.
I have no idea on the Nations League.
Oh, right, okay. Just watch the games regardless, right? Okay.
Yeah, there's divisions and I don't know.
No.
It does add something for teams who are lower ranked in terms of it can help them get qualifiers for bigger tournaments. So it's way better than international friendlies, definitely.
Yeah, sure.
And we play more teams at a similar standards to us now as well, because it's tiered as well. So overall, it's a good thing. But I've never looked. I don't know exactly how it works 100%.
You know twice as much as me already. We've got a few. Any question? If you guys got any questions, put them in the chat for us now live if you want. We'll try to answer them. Rehan Amin's put one in there. He's just put thoughts on Guita and Everson as a goalkeeper combo.
Yeah. Everson's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if I was to do that, I'd probably just go Ward instead of Everson, to be honest. I think there's every chance Ward could be dropped, but if I had to guess, I would go with the backup who's currently playing. In terms of Guaita, it's actually a similar thing. I think I would bank on. Yeah, I would bet. I would think that Guaita doesn't lose his place and keeps playing, but you've always got Sam Johnston there, haven't you, as backup? So you never know. But yeah, if you're willing to take that risk, which I think it would be, yeah, I like it personally. I think because of what we've mentioned with the Palace fixtures and how good their defence was last season, I think having a Palace defender or keeper is good.
Yeah, I find it hard to remove my bias in this one. I just don't think Guita's that good, and I think it's mentioned a lot on Twitter that there's a chance he could come out, and we did see it last season that it happened, but I do think at the same time he also had a bit of a finger injury, so it kept sort of plaguing him a little bit and he'd be in and out. I think I'm tainted, similar to what I said before, is I got him instead of Ramsdale, I think, halfway through the season, because their underlying data was better than Arsenal's and he had better fixtures, and it was absolutely tragic. Now, I shouldn't let that affect me, but it does subconsciously, and I just think, therefore, Guita may lose his place at some point. And it's pretty much based on nothing, isn't it? It is a hunch, like you said, that Johnston's just a good goalkeeper, and we feel like he could come in. I think something that's been cited is his ability on set pieces and crossing. Guita doesn't come out and claim, but from what I understand about Sam Johnston, he doesn't do that either, so I don't think that would actually change anything. I think it's slightly risky, but if Guita suddenly is dropped and you miss one game, right, and let's say Everson isn't playing as well, you get super unlucky, you've essentially just booked yourself in one transfer in 8 weeks to change that, and it might have to come in the form of a -4. So if you're willing to risk 4 points on it, because you think he's going to outscore the other goalkeepers by 4 points, then you just go for it, right? Because he may just play, like you say, he may just continue to play. I think that is still the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
Jack Walker saying De Bruyne to Salah game week 11 sound okay.
I'll just do it. Sorry, go on, mate. You go first.
I mean, I had either De Bruyne to Salah down for this week if I could have done it for my own team. Because of the injuries, I might not be able to do that. Alternatively, I had that down for game week 11 or 12. So I think in 11 they play Liverpool, don't they, or something?
They play each other in 11.
Yeah. So switching De Bruyne to Salah for that week, I think I'd be more than happy to. I'd prefer to have Salah in that game. I think, first of all, he's at home. I think he's a better FPL pick in general than De Bruyne. And I think, if you're just going for what's happened in previous games or whatever, he seems to give Cancelo a really, really hard time. Every time they play, Salah seems to perform and give Cancelo a real problem back there. So, it's not like you have to do it one at all. But if you've got a luxury move, I'd certainly prefer to have him. So I think 11's fine, and I think if you can't do it in 11, then 12's also fine. I think you have to save it for a week. Then obviously Man City aren't playing, and Salah is, so that's a no-brainer if you get to that point.
Yeah, I would just do it in 12. I think. Yeah. They play each other, and also if there's one game you have to pick all season where De Bruyne is going to play it, it's going to be it's going to be their biggest game of the season. So you don't need to be worried about rotation that week. So similar to you, I prefer Salah, but I'd only do it if I felt I had absolutely nothing else to do, essentially.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if that week, if there's a better move you could do, and just delay that by a week. To bring, particularly because Liverpool and City are playing each other, there might be another player you can bring in to start. That might improve that, or maybe you try and improve depth because of rotation potentially in 12, as we've already mentioned. But yeah, it seems fine, but consider waiting until 12 as well. But you'd have to make that decision now.
Yeah. Did we get any questions on Twitter at all, Sam, that we could look at?
Yeah, we've got a few here. So from Mark, FPL Positivity, is Maddison an absolute must this game week? Is he worth a hit and losing a promising player like Trent or Tony?
No, not for
definitely
me.
Definitely not, no.
I mean, yeah, it's a great game on paper, but taking a hit for a 1 week player, and he's not even, we're not talking about, I know he's been doing well and he could easily score, but we're not talking about a player who, usually is hitting 3 or 4 goals in a game, who can completely decimate. You haven't got Haaland home to Forest like me as captain, like an idiot. It's not something like that, I don't think. So, starting a goal behind already on that, when it's quite easy that those players he's mentioned could outscore Maddison.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just a no. That's just an easy no for me.
It's an easy no because it's an easy no anyway for a -4, I think. But for a -4 to replace 2 players that a lot of people are looking to buy at the moment, two really good players in the game, I think it's a definite no personally.
Yeah, you just ride it out.
So I think that's quite a straightforward one. This one's interesting from FPL Gato. Often the impulse when dealing with a mid-priced injured player is to replace him straight away. With bench options like Andreas and Nico Williams, may it be prudent to wait a week, roll and assess landscape a bit with 2 free transfers flexibility? And he says he's talking about Isaac here. So you're actually in this position, I guess, yourself, Luke.
I am, and I have considered that. Yeah, I have considered that because I want Salah quite a lot. I feel like I could do De Bruyne to Salah, bench Isak, and just play Pereira. I think they're home to Newcastle, aren't they?
Yeah.
The thing is, I've got 2 Newcastle defenders, so that's I don't like that, but I think it's certainly an option. Like, that could end up outscoring it quite easily. I could do Solanke in, he could blank because Bournemouth have been bad, and Salah could go mad versus Brighton, and it'll be, and especially if I put the armband on Salah to do so as well. That could be quite a big difference there. So yeah, it's an option I've considered, and I think if his team is set up in such a way where he's happy to play his first sub, I think that's fine, especially because the price rises and falls just non-existent at the moment. I think you'd probably be able to get to this. Isak doesn't look like he's going to go down. You might have to do it the week after. But yeah, if you're happy with the first sub, I think generally that's the more analytical way to play, isn't it? To try and bench your transfers whenever you can. If you stick it into review at 1.5 free transfer value, it generally will err on the side of keep your transfer because the information and the power of 2 transfers is more valuable. So yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, makes sense. I think Yeah, I think particularly with Andreas this week, basically. I probably wouldn't put Nico Williams in that category
No.
necessarily most weeks, but yeah, I think particularly with Andreas at the moment and how attacking he is in general, he's a helpful player for that, isn't he? His first sub, which is why he's in most wildcards now, as well as being in people's teams at the beginning of the season. He's still a lovely option, particularly with those fixtures for that reason.
Yeah, I think if you've got someone like Bailey instead of Pereira, I know his minutes are maybe slightly iffier, but he's playing Leeds. He's 4.7 million. I'd be happy to bench play Bailey in that game, and then reassess next week. I think that's fine.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of these questions already. I just asked this one just made me laugh from at Auto Reclose FPL. Can Haaland cover Solanke?
It remains to be seen.
We'll find out. We'll find out.
Depends on what manager he gets.
Haaland's not scored for a whole half of football for Man City.
Yeah.
It's out of form at the moment.
God, it's going to happen at some point where Haaland blanks 2 weeks in a row, and I'm already looking forward to the threads to say whether we should ditch him.
Yeah, if he's rotated against Southampton, for example.
Yeah.
And then he'll probably bang a hat trick in the Champions League against Copenhagen, and then just maybe gets one assist in the next game because he's only got an assist in 2 matches. It only takes that for those threats to come out.
Well, it's got to apply to everyone, right? If you apply that mantra where points scored are the most important thing in the world to you, if Haaland doesn't score for 4 weeks, then surely you have to take your own medicine. You have to be taking him out.
Get him out.
Yeah, best captain apart from Haaland, for me, it's Salah. I don't know.
Yeah. I think if you've got both, I think it's really interesting. I haven't thought about it a lot because I don't own both. I think I'd be really, really tempted to go with Salah personally. I think it's quite similar to last week with Kane and Haaland. I think it's just really close between the two of them. I just about preferred Kane last week, so I went for him this week. I don't know which way I'd go. It's hard to think about properly when you don't own either, but I think I'd be really tempted to go with Salah.
Yeah, I'd be tempted as well. Interestingly, on the review team you gave me, obviously this will get updated as we get closer, but it's got Haaland for 7.2 points this week and Salah for 5.4, I think. That's so small on my screen, which is obviously a very significant number. So to review heavily favours Haaland, which is surprising because it's been very pro-Salah to this point. That's based on Haaland at 77 minutes, so I think it's probably to do with the fact that given the nature of the game, you can be even more confident on his minutes. But that's a lot further away than I would have expected. I would have personally been tempted to look at Salah as well. Very, very tempted.
Yeah. I wonder if that has been moved forward a game week or something like that. I think it has been. I think that might be actually... So that's the game week 9 wildcard team, but I wonder if that's actually currently on
I see what you're saying.
I think that might currently be on game week 10 with those projections.
Okay, check it out then, guys.
Yeah, I would just double check that. I think that's probably the case. But yeah, I think it's close between those two. Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that far. That makes sense to me. But
yeah, but I'm actually quite excited because I'm going to be captaining Haaland. I'm quite excited to do it because I've gone against him quite a lot this season and went with Salah for too long. Well, I backed my decision now, and then last week it's just so nerve-wracking when you don't own him because you just know he could. Last week, even not owning him last week, I think he played Wolves, didn't he?
Yeah, and they had someone sent off as well.
Yeah, they had someone sent off in the first half, early in the second half. He'd already scored one out. You're thinking when you don't own him, he could score 4 goals here because he can. So he's just so scary. He's so scary not to captain, and felt very nerve-wracking. So I was proud of myself for holding my nerve. But I'm excited for captaining him and just relaxing basically when he's playing.
I've just checked it out actually. So you were right. So we were on a different week there. So Salah's on 7.1 and Haaland's on 6.9. So close enough where it's barely noticeable. And given this will update as we get closer as well. So it's a tough decision.
Maybe have a little think about how many minutes he plays tonight. Then might be worth considering, which will probably be 90. I've seen when he plays for Norway.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a problem against Man United though, is there? Unless it's sports science, like we've already mentioned. David Hughes has said thoughts on Patson Daka or just get Solanke. I think he started the last 2, hasn't he, Daka, if I remember rightly? He could continue to play, and obviously the Forest game is fantastic, but I don't think it's anything other than the punt unless we get information that he's going to start. Sometimes we get Leicester leaks, don't we? From remind me, who is it? Sam. What's it? Can you remember who it is?
Sam Martin.
Sam Martin, that's it. The name escaped me for a second. Sorry, Sam, if you watch. Yeah, sometimes we get information. So if he's in the team, fine, but he's a player that could come out at any point during that run. It isn't just for 1 week, isn't it? So you could potentially be booking in a transfer. I think he's a fantastic player. I think the obvious answer is just to be boring against Solanke, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. Nothing more to add on that, personally.
No.
Yeah, in terms of other questions, I think we've covered most other questions we've got on Twitter as well within the actual podcast itself.
Okay.
So I think we're all good.
Let's wrap it up then, bud. Do you want to give us the outro and all the smash that we need some more subscribers and likes, Sam? We've been slacking on that regard. We haven't even bothered to try and get people to watch this.
We are actually on 951 subscribers on YouTube, so it'd be nice to get that to 1,000, I guess. That'd be nice. And one last update quickly on the review team that we run, where we just do what the review team recommends. I had an absolute disaster on wildcard. So just to update you on that, the team it wildcarded an 8. It only got 41 points, and it's had really bad luck with captaincy all season. Sorry, it had Kane from the beginning and kept captaining Kane and didn't own Haaland, and then now owns Haaland and Solanke and went down that route straight away rather than in nine and doesn't have Kane, and captain Haaland last week didn't have Kane, has triple Newcastle defence. Had that wiped out last week, so it had a pretty brutal week, but it looks well set up as well. And it kept Salah on the wildcard, even wildcarding an 8, which most people didn't do, which again is quite interesting.
Yeah, on the bench, yeah.
Yeah, just captained him and benched him. So I guess whether it captains Haaland or Salah will depend whether those minutes are adjusted on the website before the weekend.
Yeah. At the moment, it will be Salah. It might have the last laugh. It usually does. We'll see. All right. Thanks for that, guys. Thanks for joining us. If you could, like we mentioned, drop us a like, add some comments if you can. Just share it out and about. Me and Sam really haven't got the energy to even bother sharing it, apparently. So if you could do that for us, that would be awesome. And we'll continue to try and churn these out and during the season. And it's going to get hectic, isn't it? I think you're away for the next 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to find a substitute.
Mm-hmm. I am, I'm afraid. Yeah, so there'll be someone else filling in for me the next 2 weeks, and then I'll be back, hopefully with a few good game weeks under my belt. We'll see.
Love it. Positivity.
Yeah, thanks for everything, for listening, everyone. Really appreciate it. And yeah, good to be back podcasting. We actually said we'd podcast last week, and then forgot that it was an international break.
Yeah. Sue us.
But yeah, there'll be plenty to discuss for you and whoever it is after this weekend as well. And thanks.